a number of people in the attendee list right now, just about 8. We are expecting well over 45. So I'm going to presume people are going to be a little late. Nevertheless, we're going to start with some of the formalities to respect the time of those of you who were on time. We thank you for that.
Jerry, one
yes.
real quick question. Can we promote Eliza, presenter?
Yep, I think Galen's working on that.
Yes, she's a presenter, Eliza is saying.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Eliza.
No problem.
I want to kick it off just by framing up this engagement for you. I'll just give you all a reminder of why we're doing this. The Caribbean is a region that is really facing a lot of challenges with respect to resilience, right? We already started from a place of economic development that was a little bit tenuous. We're trying to develop as countries across the CARICOM region. Then change on top of that, increased exposure to floods and storms and droughts, each one of these being shocks to our various systems. You add something like COVID on top of that and how it caused everybody in the region to have to shift the way they work, the way they do business, the way energy is consumed. And today, we're going to talk a bit about cybersecurity when we think about these new and emerging threats. Overall, though, resilience is something that matters very much to stakeholders in the Caribbean region, so much so that recently, at the 82nd special meeting of the Council for Trade and Economic Development, CARICOM endorsed the methodology, principles, and practices of integrated resource and resilience planning as a preferred mechanism for how states across the region plan their energy sectors. That is to say, we're moving away from thinking about energy merely as strictly economics. We're not thinking about how can we get the cheapest form of energy alone, though that is a consideration. What we're thinking about is how we can build energy systems that are resilient to all these many, many shocks that we present ourselves, or we are presented with, I should say. That means that we have to think differently. It means we have to plan differently. It means we need to use new tools and new frameworks, and it means we have to interact with each other differently as well, because resilience is at its very core about people and how they respond to adversity. And so with a focus on people, I'm again very glad that you all came to join us today to speak a little bit about resilience in this continuing series. I'm Gerald Lindo. I work with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency as a sustainable energy expert. And I'm also in charge of the IRRP program to some extent. And today we're going to talk about cybersecurity threats and what those mean for energy systems, how we can address some of these challenges, what sort of thinking and frameworks we can use to address them, and also what new and emerging solutions there are that we can use to address these problems. I'm going to turn it over to our partners in just a second because we're not doing this alone. We are in partnership on this initiative with the United States Agency for International Development, as well as with the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They are providing support for this and a number of other talks in this series. They have a wealth of technical knowledge, and I know they're very well regarded in the region, and we thank them for their participation. I hope you all enjoy and are informed about today, and I'm going to turn it over next to my friend Eric Conde from USAID, who's going to give us a few words about their resilience program. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jerry, for providing those important remarks. My name is Eric Conde, and I'm currently a project management specialist and the project lead for the Caribbean Energy Initiative out of the USAID Dominican Republic Mission. And this initiative sits under the Caribbean Development Program Operating Unit. So it's to serve the Caribbean region under the USAID context. I would say that on behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, I welcome you to this important webinar in cybersecurity for a resilient energy system. This is part of the Integrated Resilience Resource Planning webinar series that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, has jointly designed with USAID to support the Caribbean region. and CREEE has been so kind to undertake the coordination of this role. I also want to acknowledge the broad level of participation that we have here with us today from all across the Caribbean region. And this is particularly an indicator of the relevance of this subject and the level of need in the Caribbean region for improving the resilience of our energy systems. This level of regional technical support and coordination is at the heart of the USAID's Caribbean Energy Initiative, CEI, as we call it. And this project was recently launched out of the Dominican Republic mission, aiming to support the Caribbean region's effort to advance energy sector reforms, enable economic benefits, and preserve the development of resilience in the face of natural disasters, extreme weather, and market shocks impacts. In particular, given the critical role that electricity sector play, not only in daily welfare, but also in advancing our economic growth in the region and addressing post-disaster recovery, the Caribbean Energy Initiative is focusing on helping energy systems across the region to become more resilient. To follow up on Jerry's explanation of integrated resource planning, I can say that when we look at the CEI specific objectives, and we're talking about diversifying energy generation sources and enabling renewable energy and energy efficiency integration into the grids, also diversifying the supply of energy services and financial products in the region, and enhancing the ability of utilities across the region to manage the grids for resilience, including digitalization and cybersecurity. We see the need for integrated resource planning and addressing these upcoming challenges, particularly those to have to deal with digitalization and cybersecurity. Next slide, please. To reach these goals, we envision collaboration with energy authorities, utilities, and regulators from across the region to modernize national grids and to find ways to enable and expand private sector investments, and to support learning through exchange of experiences and lessons learning across the region. Also, when assessing the needs for achieving a truly resilient energy sector, it is clear that the lack of integrated planning that accounts for the complexity and individuality and the characteristics of these complex energy systems is one of the main constraints. Nowadays, and more than ever, it is critical that we also understand and address the gaps and needs and threats to our systems, either physical or virtual. We might call it cyber nowadays, and those that become exacerbated with the presence and influence of COVID-19. So we need to start reviewing past attacks to our networks, assessing potential impacts of cyber vulnerability of our systems, and learning what are our options to adapt and strengthen our system. This is a key part of this building block that we will be presenting today. And this is why it's truly important to highlight the set of technical tools that are available to overcome these challenges, as the ones that we have presented in the screen. So we are targeting the different subsectors of the energy sector, and these tools are available for providing technical capacity and tools for decision making and making and advancing the energy systems across the region in those different teams. And more importantly, we have available the Resilient Energy Platform, which is pretty much described and can, well, if you go through the link, you can explore and use the resources as needed. So again, I'm extremely happy to be with you today on behalf of USAID, and also it is good to see some familiar names that are attending this webinar today. I'm also sure that we'll continue to collaborate to advance our organizations and regional goals for advancing resilience of our energy systems. And I also hope that we can continue to support your important work in this region. And I'm sure that we'll have a very productive exchanges today. So thanks to all. Over.
Thank you, Eric. Before I turn it over to our colleagues at NREL to take us through the rest of the day proceedings, just a few notes on logistics and housekeeping. There'll be a lot of us in here today. So to manage things, we're going to ask that everybody submit any questions that you have through the chat box that all you should see in front of you. It should be a little chat window there at the top of the screen, a little button. Submit your questions there. I'll be monitoring it and reading out so that our colleagues at NREL can respond to them. We may, towards the end, have a Q&A session where we will unmute your mics, but for now, we're going to keep everything muted and just handle all queries through the chat box. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to NREL to take us through the rest.
Yes, thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everybody. This is James Ellsworth. I'm a research engineer at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'm joined this morning by two of my colleagues, Eliza Hotchkiss and Maurice Martin, and they'll be doing the presentations throughout the webinar. I will be acting as facilitator for this, and my first job as facilitator was going to be to do the housekeeping items, but Jerry graciously covered that for me, so thank you for doing that. This, and also as Jerry mentioned, this webinar is part of a series of IRRP workshops put on between CREEE, NREL, USAID, and CARICOM, with the overall goal of the series to be capacity building to help through your IRRP processes. The goal of this specific workshop, though, is to understand the role of cybersecurity in the power sector for energy security, and then building on that towards resilience, understanding the potential risks associated with cybersecurity, looking at things we've investigated in past webinars, such as identifying threats and identifying vulnerabilities, but this time with a specific eye towards cybersecurity. And then we'll also provide a review of these building blocks for capacity building that we are developing through our USAID NREL partnership and the Resilient Energy Platform, and they'll be part of our and the basis of our cybersecurity pillar that will be on the website that Eric showed a couple slides back. All of these bullet points overall hopefully can emphasize the importance of including cybersecurity considerations in your IRRP processes. And so with that, before we pass it off to the presenters, we'll go over to a couple of poll questions, and I'll post the link to these polls in the chat. So if you go to the chat and click on that link, or you can type it into your browser or on a cell phone if you prefer, and head over there. It's pollev.com/LCROW118. And we'll do a couple of background questions on you and who you are, because we don't have time, unfortunately, for introductions. We'll just do it via poll, and then a couple of backgrounds on how much you know about cybersecurity and how it's been considered in your planning processes so far. So when you do sign up, please use your name when you do sign up, and any other information you can provide. We'll be asking some questions later on about if you or your organization are interested in any technical assistance or help. And so if you put your name in there, it won't show on the screen during the webinar. You won't be able to see it, but I'll be able to see it later behind the scenes. So we'll be able to link you to any responses if you do indicate that you're interested in us following up with you. And so I added the countries here on this based on the sign up list. So they're in no particular order, just based on the order of who signed up for the webinar. And so that's who made the list and who didn't. For those of you who are from other, free to type those other countries into the chat box. Otherwise, you've got a pretty good breakdown here from Belize, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Suriname, St. Lucia, and a couple of others in there. All right, so good to see a good spread. We'll go to the next question now. Hopefully everybody's logged in. If you're having any difficulty, please let us know in the meeting chat. The next question is, what type of organization or agency do you represent, just so we can get a better idea of who is on this call. And this is mainly for participants and attendees. So a good spread here too, which is great to see. We've targeted this for a broad audience of decision makers and people in the power sector. So good representative of utility audience members here, but also an even split of regulators, people from energy agencies, academia, USAID, and a couple of others. And for anyone who's entering other, feel free to type in the chat what the other is so we can have a better idea. Okay, now getting to some cybersecurity specific questions. How much background knowledge do you have on cybersecurity in the power sector? There's none expected. It's just so we can get an idea, so our presenters can get an idea as they're going through their presentations. And we'll see, I imagine this is what we expected. Some people with a little bit of experience, most people with a little bit of experience. No cybersecurity experts on the line though, which probably would have expected too. All right. It's 2/3 of you with a little bit of experience. So then an opinion question, how important is cybersecurity in planning a resilient power sector? Is it essential, very important, somewhat important, or not important? It's good that nobody's selecting not important yet. You all decided to tune into a webinar on cybersecurity, so I figured that, but it's good to see how important you all think it is. And 83% saying it's essential, and 17% saying very important. So another one here, has your organization or agency considered cybersecurity in your planning and preparation? To knowledge, at least. Yes, you have considered it and included it in your plans. Yes, you've just considered it. No, you haven't, but would like to. No, because you haven't considered it. And no, because you have higher priorities. So I gave you a couple of outs there. If you said no, you've got a couple of built-in excuses and the answers there. But it seems like half have included in the plans, which is great to see. And then another 30% haven't, but would like to. And thank you all for your quick responses, by the way. And then the last question before we get going here, to your knowledge, has your organization been the target of a cyber attack? We're looking at about 50-50 so far. And the reality is, have you been targeted, or has an attack actually had an impact? I guess are two different questions, but probably in 2020, most organizations have probably been targeted by some type of cyber attack, but whether or not it was successful is another issue, and whether or not you have heard about it or know about it is another one altogether. But all right, so thank you for responding to those questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter, Eliza Hotchkiss, who's a Senior Resilience Analyst at the National Renewable Energy Lab. Eliza.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it. So for those of you who have attended the two previous workshops that both James and Eric and actually Jerry mentioned on IRRP processes, setting goals and key performance indicators, this will be an old slide for you. It won't be anything new, but we wanted to just refresh memories by providing a review of the IRRP process. As I think most of you know, it's rooted in traditional IRP planning and creates several least cost portfolios, but scenarios and KPIs will be developed to represent potential future conditions and include a least regrets portfolio. And I really like that least regrets portfolio. I think that's a nuance that's very different to the IRRP process. And again, this process will require performance assessments and is an iterative process. mostly because hazards, threats, and vulnerabilities are dynamic and constantly changing. But then conditions are changing in terms of what is implemented and where there are funding resources available to improve systems or operations of those systems. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned previously, understanding risks is very important to the IRRP process. Risks are comprised of threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities, as we've mentioned previously. And threats can include things like economic downturn and socioeconomic impacts on a country, or a threat of cyber attack into a grid system. Natural hazards that are known to occur in the Caribbean are things that we've discussed, include earthquakes, flooding, storm surges. Unfortunately, we've seen a couple very damaging hurricanes this season already, landslides, and previously we saw the Sahara dust impacts in the Caribbean. And then vulnerabilities can be things like aging infrastructure or staff turnover, where staff are not trained on how to operate systems. So we'll use these terms again during this presentation and workshop. And so I just wanted to refresh our memories in terms of what we are meaning when we use words like threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. Today, we'll talk more about power sector threats specifically. And these, as I mentioned, can include things like physical attacks, lack of training, or lack of situational awareness. Unfortunately, accidents do occur. Those are considered threats, and then cyber attacks. We all have a pretty good understanding of the natural hazards that threaten our power systems. However, threats are a lot more difficult and complex. They're multi-layered. On the next slide, you'll see that we often talk about resilience and cybersecurity in the context of energy security. And there are a few resources available that mention cyber resilience. And in our research at NREL, we think resilience and cybersecurity are components of energy security. So that's just a teaser of what we're going to be talking about today. But I'd like to introduce Maurice Martin, who is in our cybersecurity group here at NREL, Energy Security and Resilience Center. And he's going to dive in more on the cybersecurity concept.
Thank you, Eliza, and good morning, everyone. I want to start by talking about an incident that happened in early 2019 at the Guyana Power and Light utility. At that time, the utility was a type of malware called ransomware, and you probably are all familiar with that, at least from the news. And unfortunately, I'm sure some of you have already have firsthand experience with malware. But basically, the idea is that the attackers inject software into your system that holds your data hostage, and they demand payment in order to get the to release your data back to you and give you the codes needed to unencrypt the data. In this particular instance, GPL did not pay the ransom that was demanded by the attackers. They restored on their own. But so in a way, it was a kind of a low impact event. But I just, as a hypothetical, I want to float the idea of like, what if the malware that was part of that attack had not been targeting the information technology part of the business, the part of the business that just runs bits and bytes and handles customer interfaces. The main impact of this was that some of the customer services doing queries and taking applications were offline. But if instead the attackers had targeted the computers that control actual physical devices on the system, switches, inverters, generators, that type of thing, what kind of mischief or damage could they have done under that circumstance? Next slide, please. And this is not as hypothetical as we'd like it to be. A few years back, a cyber attack on a chemical processing plant in Saudi Arabia, the Petro Rabi facility, experienced a very unique and alarming type of malware. This malware attacked the safety instrumentation system. Now, that's the system that is designed to ensure safety of the human beings working at the plant, to take things offline at the first sign of trouble. And what the malware did was turn that off. So if there had been some kind of a incident at the plant, the workers would have had no protection. They would have been exposed to possibly lethal chemicals. This is the first time that really we've seen malware come forward that has seems to have as its goal to cause safety and possibly death to human beings. So it's very alarming. It represents a whole new level of cyber attack, and it's something that has been studied since the incident 3 years ago, and is going to be a concern going forward. Next slide, please. So you can kind of imagine utility as consisting of two parts: the IT part, and the IT information technology has the same concerns as any other business. All types of business have to worry about ransomware, about attackers coming in and deleting data, stealing sensitive data, and that can be anything from to credit cards to information about your employees. No organization likes to feel that their own workers have been exposed due to a cyber attack. And then, of course, reputational damage. Advance the slide, please. But in addition to that, the type of thing that all businesses have to worry about, utilities have to be concerned with those cyber physical events, kind of like the Triton malware, where malware can focus on computers and control physical objects. And that's where you get into safety concerns. Interrupted service, have the attackers been able to disrupt delivery of electricity? And then damage or destroyed physical assets. Could you misoperate? If you were an attacker, could you misoperate the equipment in such a way that you'd, say, destroy a large transformer, something that would take a long time to bring back online, and thus cause long-term disruption to the system? So that's kind of the background of what utilities are facing this day. And this slide kind of is the slide showing the increase in cyber attacks. We've all seen stuff like that. I kind of feel like these bar graphs in the year 2020 have lost their ability to shock people or get people worried, because we've seen so many bar graphs on so many different topics that we're no longer scared of these things. But it's worth noting on the pie chart, particularly the critical manufacturing and energy sectors are big targets, or they were as of 2016, and I can only imagine as things have heated up in the world that has stayed the same or grown even larger. So utilities, critical infrastructure of all types are definitely targets. And next slide, please. And kind of the megatrend behind all this is that we live in an increasingly connected world. More devices are becoming connected, and that includes these kind of cyber physical devices, the ones that are able to affect things in the real world. And the estimate is that there's going to be 125 billion of those devices in use over the next 10 years. So that's a lot of security concerns. And they range from minor annoyances, like if you had a cyber attacker target your refrigerator and spoil your food, to things like automated self-driving cars, where if an attacker were to take control of that you might see accidents on the roadway and possibly human fatalities. Next slide, please. So how is our organization, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, involved with this problem and its solution? Next slide. A little bit about us. We are located in Golden, Colorado. We have about a little more than 2,000 employees here in an area where we have a lot of access to solar facilities and wind turbines. That was kind of the genesis of the lab, is kind of studying how to bring these renewables and make them part of a resilient and reliable energy mix. And we've kind of grown in scope to kind of address this idea of the evolving grid. What is it that the grid is going to look like in the future? What is it going to take to secure that? So NREL, among the national labs, strives to be very forward-looking, anticipating the grid of tomorrow and its needs. The Energy Security and Resilience Program, of which I am a part, is specifically targeted at whole systems, long-term and all-hazard security and resilience solutions. And that includes everything from terrestrial weather, natural disasters, to space weather, physical attacks, cyber attacks, which is my area of focus, and electromagnetic attacks as well. Next slide, please. So looking at kind of how the grid is changing right now. We started out kind of in that lower left area where everything was driven by centralized generation, big turbines burning coal, burning gas, burning nuclear fuel, pushing that out to the grid edge. That's changing more and more. We're seeing utility scale renewables come online along with energy storage. And at the very edge of the grid, you see a whole host of different devices that are now actively participating in the grid. And that's everything from electric vehicles, which are obviously a new type of load, but can also be used, at least theoretically, to store energy at a local level. Smart thermostats responding to changing conditions, home energy management systems, water heaters, smart meters. These devices need to work harmoniously to maintain the kind of grid stability that we enjoyed very easily when generation was centralized. Now they need to work in coordination, and they need to be actively managed, which means there has to be communication, information passing back and forth. And that provides a couple of new attack surfaces for cyber attackers. One of the devices themselves, trying to compromise these grid edge devices and using that either to do disruption or as a way of moving upstream and attacking the more centralized services. And the other is the communication, the packets being passed between these different devices, which are all dependent on the protocols and the medium. How do you make sure that those are secured? And so you can imagine as more of these come online, the attack surface just becomes very large, very difficult to manage. And that's kind of where NREL comes into play. We're looking to make that more manageable, to reduce the size of this problem and make it something that even utilities of all scale can take advantage of, whether they have a large staff devoted to cybersecurity or not. Next slide, please. The Secure Cyber Energy Systems Group is the one that I am a part of. And this is just kind of a taste of the portfolio projects that we're working on. And it kind of also explains a little bit about some of the threats. The first project that I'll talk about is called SAGA, and that stands for Situational Awareness of Grid Anomalies. And the idea of SAGA is to give grid operators a much better much more detailed look into what's happening on the grid at any given moment by collecting data from out-of-band sources. And in this case, those out-of-band sources are a series of about 300,000 sensors, and that's in the US, that are operated by the cable broadband industry. So those sensors are gathering data about the state of the grid, and we're now making that available to utilities and putting some very nice analytics and visualizations on that. And the idea here is that utility operators can better protect the grid if they have the most advanced high fidelity data coming back about the grid. And that's kind of an example. What you're seeing there is an example of visualization, but we've got a lot more that are different types of visualizations that kind of do different things with the data and give the system operators a great insight into what's going on their systems. Next slide, please. Another project that we're working on in conjunction with some of the other national labs here in the US is focused on firmware. Now, I mentioned that all those devices that are on the grid edge, they each are potentially a source of vulnerability that attackers could leverage. And in particular, in recent years, attackers have realized that a lot of the firmware or software operating on these grid edge devices is potentially vulnerable. And they've begun crafting attacks that focus on the firmware. And really, the problem with that is that there's not a lot of insight from the system operators about the state of the firmware, what its vulnerabilities might be, and whether there are any indicators of compromise that need to be addressed. This project attempts to address that. We're doing some firmware scans and building a semi-automated system that monitors the state of firmware, reports back vulnerabilities, and provides alerts to system operators so that they can take appropriate behavior. Next slide, please. Blossom. This project is focused on blockchain. We've all heard about blockchain technology in recent years. It kind of went through a period of when everyone was excited about it and claiming that blockchain was the solution to every problem. We're coming down from that a little bit, and this project attempts to say, okay, we had this irrational exuberance. Now let's look at the use cases and places within the grid structure where blockchain would really be useful and would really provide value. And that takes a lot of different forms. A lot of it has to do with transactive energy, but also in the cybersecurity realm, kind of maintaining a zone of trust, making sure that the devices you're talking to are actual devices that are supposed to be on the system. You don't have man-in-the-middle attacks going on or other types of disruptions. So providing some assurance of integrity for the messages and authentication for the devices themselves. Next slide. Kind of bringing all this together is a platform that we have developed called the Cyber Energy Emulation Platform, or the C platform. And the idea here is to bring together a lot of different technologies so that we can do the kind of advanced modeling and simulation and visualization that enables us to understand the cyber threats. And that C is helping us get to the bottom of questions such as if an attacker were to compromise large numbers of distributed energy devices, solar panels, or the inverters for solar panels, wind energy, what could they really do? What would the impact be? And then how do you begin to defend against that? And SEEP enables us to stand up digital twins of utilities and study those in details, launch attacks on those digital twins in a safe environment, and see what it is that what is the real level of threat. It's very easy to say attackers could do this, attackers could do that, But C really puts some ground truth to that and enables us to know what the actual threats are, and then helps us to also develop defenses against that. Next slide. The Distributed Energy Resource Cybersecurity Framework, or DERCF, as we call it. This started out as actually a project that we were doing for the U.S. Department of Energy. And DOE has a lot of facilities with their own distributed energy resources, and they wanted some kind of a tool to ensure that those facilities were not a source of cyber vulnerability. And after we built DERCF, we realized that it actually had applications for a lot of different types of organizations, including utilities. And the final form of DERCF is as a self-assessment tool, where you go in and step through a series of questions that kind of enable you to look at different aspects of your cybersecurity and get a rating and get a report indicating what parts you need to build out. Next slide, please. DERCF is divided into 3 different general domains. One is cyber governance. The kind of how is your organization, what are the processes that you have in place to address cybersecurity? Cyber physical technical management, how are you managing the firewalls, the intrusion detection systems, that your cryptography, that type of thing. And then the physical security assessment. How are you securing the actual installations? Do you have what you need in place to make sure that attackers are not breaching your physical defenses as an entree to compromising your cyber defenses? And DERCF has proven very useful. We're doing a series of assessments, some of which just focus on the cyber governance. And that's turned out to be very useful for some utilities to help them get a sense of where they are in terms of their processes. And from there, you can build out the other domains. So this is available on our website. If you go to nrel.gov and search for DERCF, you'll see it there. But we're hoping to do a whole series of assessments using DERCF as the framework, and number one, use those assessments to provide actionable advice to utilities on improving their cybersecurity, and also to kind of look at common challenges that utilities face across many different utilities, and see what that means in terms of what the kind of assistance we should be providing to those utilities to help them address those challenges. Next slide. Modulo T is a project that is focused on the challenge of making sure that messages are not compromised to grid edge devices. A lot of grid edge devices, and that would be inverters for solar panels, things like that, switches, anything that has a communications connection and is also physically active on the power level. Making sure those devices have secure communication, and you can imagine a case where these devices are just kind of on some kind of open network, or even receiving control signals across the public internet. Man-in-the-middle attack could cause misoperation of those devices. By the Modulo T project has as its goal to develop a low-cost encryption module that acts as a bump in the wire for those devices, and ensures authentication and integrity of the messages. So you no longer need to worry about the man-in-the-middle attacker, and can conduct secure communications across insecure networks. This is a project that's actually wrapping up now, and we're looking for commercialization partners to take it to the next level and actually make it a commercial product. Next slide, please. And we're doing a number of cybersecurity vulnerability and mitigations assessments for systems with high penetration of operation. In other words, if you're thinking about reaching a level of solar penetration where you're getting 40%, 50%, 60 or 70% of your annual power generation from solar panels, you might begin to get concerned about the cybersecurity implications of that and what an attacker could do on that kind of a system. These studies that we're doing for individual utilities right now are helping to answer those questions. And those tend to be confidential to the utilities, helping them understand their vulnerabilities, but not broadcasting those vulnerabilities to the world. Although we do hope to also publish some of the reports of some of the results of what we're seeing coming out of those studies. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Maurice, I noticed that Eric from USAID has his hand up. I don't know how long it's been up. Sorry if I've missed that, but did you have something, Eric? Or maybe it was just up from earlier.
Okay. Well,
Right.
if there's a question, I can certainly address it. Cybersecurity capacity building. In other words, how do you begin to build up the capacity of utilities to address these many cyber concerns? And I learned about quite a bit about this a few years back when I first came to NREL. I did a project where we took another cyber assessment tool and did a number of U.S. utilities to find the common challenges that they were facing. And one thing that came out of this was that a lot of utilities, and particularly smaller utilities that are maybe struggling with their resources, their cybersecurity efforts tend to be uneven. They are built out in some areas, but are maybe underbuilt in other areas. And the idea here was to draw on other work that's been done in partnership between NREL and USAID, particularly the building blocks for distributed generation, and make something similar for utilities in the that address cybersecurity and help them to think about all the different areas they need to build out for cybersecurity. And I'll kind of give a high-level overview of this. Next slide, please. Yeah, the objectives of the building blocks is that they would both serve as an introduction and also a tool for those who are already deeply involved with cybersecurity. That they should address multiple stakeholders. I think that as the evolving grid becomes more and more, has more customer involvement, has more third-party involvement from data, from cloud suppliers, from service providers, and third-party renewable providers, that cybersecurity becomes a multi-stakeholder endeavor. There has to be a lot of cooperation between government, industry, everyone involved, vendors, in order to achieve cybersecurity. Interconnected and mutually supporting, the different building blocks kind of touch on each other and support each other. And then also, obviously, not the last word. This is a place to kind of help advance thinking, but is not meant to cover everything or to be the end of the road. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a high-level map of the building blocks that we're working on. You can see there's about how many do we have now? 5, about 10 of these blocks. The dark green ones are those that are internal to a utility. The shaded blocks are those that are external to the utility. And this kind of mapping shows how they interrelate. And I'll walk through some of them to give you a better sense of that. Next slide, please. At the very center of all this is the organizational security policy. This is an effort within the utility that captures a lot of information about the risk facing the utility, as well as the resources that are allocated to address cybersecurity. And a piece of that is the compliance. In other words, what regulations apply to the utility and must be adhered to, and how does that get folded into an action plan for security. You can kind of think of this as like a very high-level plan. It's something that lays out what the organization intends to do, how they intend to do it, what resources are available, and then it is something that is reviewed and discussed both within the utility and hopefully with other parties as well. Once it's in place, it drives the objectives for some of the lower level building blocks, such as incident response, education, and the technical controls. Next slide, please. Laws and regulations, those are external to the utility. A lot of countries already have regulations in place that address security, particularly specifically for utilities, and we see kind of the trend is that more regulations are being implemented as cybersecurity becomes more of an important issue. And the question is, how do you implement those new laws and regulations in such a way that they are a positive effect, both for the general public and for the utility? And that might seem like an odd thing, you know, which industry or business wants to be regulated, and yet I've heard a lot of utilities say that they are grateful for regulations because they free up dollars to do some of the security work that might otherwise not get done. Ideally, the development of these laws and regulations are something that is a collaborative effort between the utility and the government agencies who are doing the regulation. And USAID actually has a very nice resource that specifically focuses on that collaboration. In other words, how can you make that the implementation of those regulations a positive for all concerned? And that's this document right here. Highly recommend that. It's current as of earlier this year, and just a great resource. Compliance, next slide, please. That's the utility's efforts to abide by the laws and regulations. So the step one there is to enumerate all the regulations that apply to your utility, and then break those down into which ones actually are relevant to your business, and then how do you fold that compliance effort into your overall security planning. Next slide, please. Risk management. That is the part of cybersecurity thinking that goes beyond compliance. In other words, you can be compliant with all relevant laws and regulations, but that doesn't mean you're 100% secure. The laws and regulations can't cover everything. If you get hit, you are still on the hook for whatever damages or negative consequences you experience. So in an effort to think beyond the compliance, risk management is a way of looking at the threat landscape, what's going on out there in the scary world of cyber attacks. How might it affect your organization? What are the possible impacts? And that gets back to the C platform that I discussed earlier. What could attackers actually do if they were to compromise your system? And then that also gets folded into the organizational security plan. Next slide, please. The threat landscape that is external to your organization, that is the all of the sources of information that address vulnerabilities, the CVEs, the CWEs that are indicators that tell you what you need to look for and what devices or systems might be vulnerable, as well as different kind of news or reporting services. In the United States, we have the EISAC, which kind of informs utilities about threats. There's also publicly available sources of information from nonprofits and from commercial organizations. I know SANS, the educational organization, runs its own cyber threat intelligence. But the process of selecting what information you need to monitor, what sources of information you need, and someone in your organization to take action based on those observables becomes part of this threat landscape effort, and it feeds into the risk management because it's telling you what's going on in the world, and you need to factor that into your risk management thinking. And this next slide just shows some of the sources of information. When you go shopping for your cyber threat intelligence, you ask yourself questions like, what is my budget? Can I afford a paid subscription, or do I want to rely on the free public services like SANS Internet Storm Center? Who do I trust? Do I want to get information from a nonprofit, from a government agency, from a private company? And then do I want to look at general threat information or something that's specific to the electrical sector? Next slide, please. Technical controls, those are what most people think of when they think of cybersecurity, and that's things like access control, firewalls, intrusion detection, that kind of thing. One thing that I hope everyone takes away is that that's only a small part of the cybersecurity effort, that really cybersecurity is much broader than technical controls and is an all-organization effort and requires participation of everyone involved in the business. Next slide, please. Education. It remains a truism that most cyber attacks begin when an employee of the organization makes some kind of a critical mistake. They click on it, they open an email that they should not have because it contains malware. They visit a website that is infected, and then that infection jumps into the organization's IT system. They plug in removable media like flash drives that cause a cyber breach. Educating your employees about these issues and developing safe cyber habits is the focus of this building block. And that is something that is critical. It's low-hanging fruit, and it's beneficial to the organization and to the individuals help because it helps them understand what they should be doing both in their work life and their public life. And then incident response. That is what your organization does when there is a cyber attack. You begin by assuming that you will be attacked at some point and begin planning in advance for how you will handle it, who will be part of the response team, what will be the processes in place. If you wait until after you were attacked to try and figure it out, you are going to be in rough shape. Having everything in place already, all the tools, all the equipment, all the outside help that you may need to call on, all the law enforcement and government agencies that you're going to want to report the attack to goes a long way towards making that incident response run a lot smoother, and then rehearsing those plans, making sure everyone knows their roles in advance and is ready to go on as soon as an attack is identified. So these are just some of the resources that we're building on as we create the building blocks. A lot of them probably going to be familiar. The point of the building blocks is kind of distilled down to some very small in length documents and with references to the other more better known documents. So we're looking at each of the building block being about 2 or 3 pages of text with supporting resources and references and kind of to jumpstart thinking about what needs to be done. And then more resources on the next page, and then some more examples of cyber threat intelligence, and then this last is a screenshot of our DERCF tool. And I just wanted to put that out there because it is a free resource. It is anonymous. You don't have to state the name of your organization. You can just put the information in, and it stays behind the firewall, and you can get a sense of how well your organization is doing in a lot of different areas and where maybe you need to build that out. And we are available to kind of provide assistance for use of the DERCF and provide guided assessments that use DERCF as well if you want to go that route. And that's sometimes useful because when you go to make the case for your security effort to the management of your organization, either the general managers or the CEOs or the board of directors, it sometimes helps to have an outside company give their input to the process. So if that's the case with your organization, we're glad to step in and be part of that process and assist you in any way that you find useful. And that is the bulk of my presentation. We'd love to hear more from you. Next slide, please. And I'll take any questions now that folks might have.
We do. Thanks a lot for a really great presentation, Maurice. I have a bunch of questions in the chat that I'll read through. The first question is easy to answer. A couple of people asked, will the slides be made available? You can say yes. And now into a couple more meeting ones. Galen asks, how are the projects outlined earlier integrated into existing systems? What's the method for identifying policies which need to be implemented? I guess on that second one, the DERCF tool helps to identify what kind of policies need to be implemented, at least from an organizational level. But in terms of the projects you mentioned, how are you integrating those into existing utility systems right now?
Yeah, the most of the projects that I presented are research projects, so they're kind of at the lab stage. We're developing the technologies, and the process goes. We develop the technology, get it to the prototyping stage. It's then passed to a commercial entity, which turns it into a product. So a lot of these are not yet deployed on different systems, but part of our work is to identify the potential partners and get that process underway, get a qualified vendor interested enough to fold it into a particular project. Now, the ones that are ready to go day one is DERCF. So you're correct in that's a great tool for both identifying policies and other areas that need to be implemented. The SEEP tool is also available to do those kind of impact analysis type of work that I talked about. So if there's any interest in that, please do let me know. And we are building out we're writing the building blocks, and those are going to be released on the Resilient Energy website, and will be available for you. So we're hoping that's going to be a resource that utilities find useful.
Not just utilities, I think a lot of organizations will be able to make use of that building blocks framework there.
Hopefully, yeah.
Lib Butler, hey Lib, asks, she says, thanks for an excellent presentation. Does NREL have observations re how successful utilities are implementing the NREL platform and threat response, for example, with lead in IT, risk management or planning, reporting structures, timelines, funding? How are organizations or successful utilities implementing some of the findings that you guys are coming up with?
Yeah, great question. What we're finding is that the successful companies are the ones that start from the top of the organization. In other words, they do someone within the organization makes the effort to inform the CEO, the board of directors about the issues that the organization is facing. Once you have buy-in from the very top level of the organization, things can proceed. You can make progress. If those are not bought in, you're gonna find your cybersecurity efforts stalled indefinitely. And I'll give you an example of this. I visited a utility several years ago and was doing a presentation there and was talking to some of the technical folks. And they pulled me in a room to complain about their own CEO. They had set up rules about how you could use your company issued laptops and what type of activities were acceptable and what were not. And the CEO was ignoring them. He was taking his work laptop home so his kids could load music onto it and play games on it and expose it to a lot of cyber bad actors in that way. That kind of an attitude will cause other employees within an organization will pick up on that kind of an attitude, and the cybersecurity effort will not go forward. If you get the C-level folks, the board of directors on board with this, and they are talking the talk and walking the walk, everyone will pick up on it. Everyone will understand that they have a role to play in cybersecurity, and that will filter down throughout the organization. And then your things like your education program, your efforts to get people to develop good cyber habits, to not click on those malicious links, those will start to bear fruit, and they will see that they are part of the solution and part of an effort to keep the entire organization both safe and profitable.
Yeah, leadership matters. Ricardo Case of JPS, Jamaica Public Service Company, says a trend now is utility supported, that is provisioned or device powered public Wi-Fi, which brings serious cybersecurity concerns. What do you see happening in the space as these become more common?
That is a serious concern. I think what needs to happen is that some of the concepts of security that have been developed in the IT space need to be applied to this problem. In other words, you're now in some cases, and I've seen this in the United States, the utility is interested in providing broadband services because it's so valuable, especially to rural communities. But they're also using those same networks to carry their own operational data. And so you've got this mixing of kind of public data with operational data, which creates a serious vulnerability. That's kind of the whole idea behind the Modular T project is, can we develop something that is low cost, easy to use, and provides a secure tunnel, if you will, between the utilities devices and the utilities command control center over this insecure network where you've got everything, people are using it kind of like as an extension of the public Wi-Fi. You're essentially acting as a internet provider. So all this unsecure traffic is on there, but you have the tools to develop a secure tunnel across that. And then in the Modular 2 project, we are attempting to make that solution affordable and something that can be deployed by any utility.
Follow up, you could make it like open source and free?
It is open source. We are open sourcing it. But the next step to getting it in use is to find a commercial entity, equipment vendor who's willing to make it a commercial product. And that's where we are right now. We're actually finishing up that project at the moment, and we've just done a presentation where we've identified a couple of potential commercializers for that technology, and hoping that those deals go forward.
Okay, cool. Owen Gunning from the Jamaica Society of Energy Engineers asks, do you build into the organizational risk mitigation strategy local training in the event that the organization has to revert to local control?
That is an excellent an excellent idea. The challenge, there's a couple of challenges associated with that. One is scale, and that reverting to local control can work depending on the size of the system, and also in some cases, if the how do you say this? One thing we're facing in the United States right now is that our system is becoming so automated that we no longer have the option for local control, and that's a source of concern. That's raising some alarms when you occasionally hear some of our senators say we should go back to simpler systems that aren't quite so reliant on automation, or because in the event that we have this kind of a breach, we wouldn't have anything to fall back on. The flip side of that is that all this automation kind of enables a lot of functions that people find useful and valuable and profitable. So there's a right balance in there. I don't know that we've hit it yet, but I would say in terms of risk mitigation, that is absolutely a solid approach, is that make sure that in the event that you have to revert to local control, everyone involved knows what their roles would be in that alternate scenario and how to best execute that plan.
Makes sense. Austin Castro asked a piece of a question I want to ask, actually. He says, it was an excellent and informative presentation. Are regulators mandating cybersecurity in the Caribbean, or is it pretty much still left up to the utilities?
I'm going to admit that I am not familiar enough with all the different regulatory policies across the Caribbean to answer that question in any kind of meaningful way. I know that around the world, different organizations are becoming, or different governments are becoming more interested in cybersecurity for utilities. India, I think, just stepped up their regulatory game, but I am not familiar enough with the Caribbean to say.
Fair enough, but following up on that, because in your presentation, the role of the regulator seemed important to me, but it was kind of hard to get a grip on where, right? In terms of all the devices that may or may not connect to the grid, maybe that's whoever regulates standards, or it could be the utility itself dictating what can connect and what can't. In terms of sharing information between a communications utility, like a flow or cable company, with an energy utility, it could be two different regulators right there. If we're talking about passing laws around cybersecurity and having different penalties and data protection frameworks, that it seems like it could be like 3 or 4 or 5 different regulators. And I'm wondering what best practices exist for regulators to kind of work cross-functionally across domains and collaborate, because it seems like a lot of these problems don't get solved without collaboration. Is there anybody working on that?
That is yes. The challenge, every country does things slightly differently, and even if, I mean, take the like, if you look at the European Union, they've established a new framework for privacy and data confidentiality. So there's a whole set of guidances for what member countries within the European Union have to do to protect privacy, and how they have to respond when there is a data breach. Over in the United States, California has kind of modeled their privacy regulations on the European model, but that's California. The rest of the United States does not. That kind of variation shows up, everywhere. What you often see is regulators first begin to look at what they begin to regulate what should be done in the event of a breach, and so it's kind of after the fact. But there's less kind of guidance on what to do before the breach. And one of our audience points out that the European GDPR even extends beyond the EU border. So thank you. That's a good point that I had left out.
We're just about out of time, so I'll just read in one further, not a question, but current from Niles in TT. Cybersecurity have a central office in government dealing with cybersecurity, but they respond to and serve the public sector first. I think that's a good place to leave it. I think in terms of building out our capacity, not in a an organizational sense, but in a kind of regulatory sense, to address cybersecurity issues, it's something we're going to have to spend a lot more time on in the Caribbean, and maybe something that an agency like OCUR, who coordinates regulators across the region, could take up in a serious way, because it is a space in which I think we're going to have to do a lot more work. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to James, who I think is going to have a final poll for us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Maurice. We'll go back to the poll everywhere for a few wrap-up questions. I posted that link again in the chat of this meeting. Just a couple. Let's see. So yeah, go to that link. You can click on the link there, or hope maybe you still have the window open. How important is cybersecurity in planning a resilient power sector? Essential, very important, somewhat important, or not important? And if this question looks familiar, it is the same one we had at the beginning of the webinar. So wondering if anyone's going to answer differently after this. Hopefully that it's more important. Hopefully people don't think it's less important after the webinar. Although when we asked this at the beginning, it was already clearly a high priority with all of our audience members. But it does look like it's a little bit more of a priority now. All right, and then we'll try to go through these quickly because we are short on time. But in addition to this webinar, USAID and NREL, through the Resilient Energy Platform, we're also forming a kind of Latin American Caribbean cybersecurity working group to address specific cybersecurity concerns and develop materials for technical assistance or support in the region. So with an eye towards that, we're trying to get an idea and some feedback on which of these areas are most needed or desired by you all, by people who are who might be subject to some of these cybersecurity concerns in the region. So this question says, in which of these areas do you think your energy sector needs the most technical assistance and support? You can respond up to 3 times. Unfortunately, they're not showing on the screen, but I do see the results coming in and the responses coming in on the bottom there. So where would you most be interested in technical assistance and support? Cybersecurity governance, risk management, regulatory compliance, understanding the threat landscape, secure procurement, IT network security, OT network security, protecting against ransomware, incident response, cybersecurity awareness training, or if there's anything else, I guess other. Still a couple of responses trickling in. So that was good. We'll go to the next question. And for that technical assistance, what type of support would be most useful? Would it be through regional workshops, through visiting speakers, through some conferences, webinars like this one, some standardized templates, customized tools, or in-person technical assistance on specific issues, or other? And again, if you have other ideas for this, please feel free to follow up in the chat or with us after the webinar. It looks like those results are pretty steady. Thank you all for participating in these. Then a couple yes/no questions to end it off. Would your organization be interested in a cybersecurity governance assessment? If you do say yes, I hope be able to see who responded yes, and hopefully when you signed up for the poll everywhere, your name, with your name at least, and we'll be able to figure out who you are, link you back to your organization. Or if not, you can always reach out to us through either through CREEE or through email addresses that were provided in the slides, which will be shared afterwards. And then final question is, actually, I'll go back to the previous question. A cybersecurity governance assessment would be something that's focused on the administrative aspect of your organization-wide efforts to protect data and operations. So something that would deliver scores in a number of areas on how your organization is doing and provide guidance for improving all-around cybersecurity efforts. And then the last question, would your organization be interested in a guided return on investment assessment? So this is something that would kind of be focused on the anticipated value of new investments in cybersecurity and compare it to the cost of those investments. So kind of a for investments in cybersecurity, what is the return on those investments? And seeing the results, but I guess they're not showing up on this live screen either. So otherwise, thank you all for attending, and thank you to all of our presenters for giving great presentations. We will send out the slides and the responses to these poll questions shortly after the webinar, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar. So are there any final comments before we go?
Doesn't seem so, but I will say, James, thanks a lot to you guys at NREL and USAID for making this possible. Quite informative, and it seems there's a lot of engagement. We'll make sure to send out not just the materials you mentioned, but also a poll to all attendees here, just so we can know whether or not this was a useful event for you, and we can continue to improve this series. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Thank you for your. As said, we don't want it to end here. If you think it would be useful for your organization to follow up with CREEE or follow up with NREL on some of these matters, we welcome it, so we can help build resilience across the region. That's it from me. Any final word, guys?
Don't think so.
Doesn't think so. All right. Thanks, everybody. A little bit over time. Great having you all. Peace and love to you all. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye. And Galen, just a reminder, could we download the attendance list so we can know